Hello guys and welcome, it is ThatSrb2DUDE here today bringing you yet another Splatoon 2 video because on October the 11th we have another Splatoon 2 patch. Now this is going to be patch 1.4 and there are a lot of buffs and nerfs coming into this patch. It's a lot to do with the weapons, special weapons, and gear abilities as well. So I'm going to go over the patch notes with you and I'm going to try and be as brief as possible, give a few thoughts after each one, and this is just how we're going to do it. Also note that this is being translated from the Japanese patch notes, considering at the time I was making this video, the English patch notes had not come out. So I'm going to try and do this the best I possibly can, so let's go through it. The first change for weapons is the Splash-O-Matic. It now has an increased range of 6% and also paints slightly better. Honestly, something I feel like the Splash-O-Matic needed. You know, nobody at this point in time really uses the weapon. You don't normally see it in solo queue or in tough or even. You don't really see it at all actually. So I definitely feel like this is something it needed. The next change is for the 52 gal. It has a 6% more effective range for 50 damage bullets without changing the actual full range of the weapon. Now what this means is that the bullets that you fire from the 52 won't fall to the floor as fast as it used to. It's mainly referring to bullets that are like direct. Like if you're shooting upwards of the 52, this would not apply, but if you're shooting just straight forward, how the bullet would fly, it would be, I guess, slightly more floaty before it actually falls to the ground. So that is pretty much what it's referring to. Any damage output that is less than 50, this will not be the case. So for the NZAP, the movement speed has been changed from normal to high, basically meaning you can run faster with the NZAP. And its run speed while shooting has also been increased by 5%, and it also paints much better than it did before. Nothing too significant with the NZAP, the only thing is that you can just run faster with it. Now these are some really interesting buffs that I personally cannot wait for. The Splattershot Pro's bullet velocity speed has been increased by 67%. Bear in mind the range has not been changed. Bullet velocity is basically referring to how fast the bullets are traveling to its end point. Basically, each bullet that's going to be firing out of the Splattershot Pro is going to be flying at the speed of sound. No pun intended. The Splattershot Pro also has a 10% smaller aim cross while shooting and a 40% smaller aim cross while jumping. Meaning that in general, the Splattershot Pro is just a much more accurate weapon, and while it's jumping too, which is scary to think. The Splattershot Pro also has a 10% faster movement speed while shooting and 2% more spread. As you'd think, you're 10% more faster while you're shooting and you spread more ink by about 2%. It's not too significant, but it's a nice buff. Now just reading this, I cannot wait for the Splattershot Pro. That's going to be so much fun. Overall, the Splattershot Pro is just going to be so much more accurate, so much quicker, and will be heavily reliant on tracking, which is something I really love. Now here's another really interesting buff. For the 96 gal, the overall damage has been changed from 52 damage to 62 damage. Now for any of my Splatoon 1 veterans out there, do you remember the pre-patch 96 gal? It has basically been taken out of the grave and is put into our laps. Thank you very much, Nintendo. The 96 gal also has an 8% smaller aim cross while shooting and a 14 smaller aim cross while jumping. Basically, overall, the 96 just much more accurate than it was before in the last patch. Now, a lot of you might be scared about the 96 being, you know, super powerful now because it now does 62 damage, but mainly why they changed it back in Splatoon 1 to 52 is mainly because of damage up. And because in Splatoon 1, 3 subs of damage up on the 96 gal with 62 damage will just push it all the way to 67, basically making any number of defense up completely useless. Like, there's no point of using it. But considering now in Splatoon 2, damage up is not a thing, every single 96 is going to do 62 damage, and there aren't any perks that have anything to do with, you know, defense up besides of bomb defense, which doesn't even apply to the actual weapon itself. So don't be scared. The 96 is definitely going to be better, but it's not going to be as scary as it was in Splatoon 1. So just to, you know, reassure people that. Now, Hate Tree also has some interesting buffs. The Hate Tree now has a 25% faster bullet velocity. The Hate Tree also has 5 frames less end lag after a jump and 15 frames less end lag after the jump. The Hate Tree can now also paint much better under your feet. So basically what this means for the Hate Tree is that the bullets will be flying faster towards your opponents, and while you're going up from a jump and going down from a jump, you are slightly more accurate. The Clash Blaster has also received a bit of change. Its explosion radius has been been increased by 14%, and the general explosions of paint have been buffed. Now, honestly, I feel like this is something that the Clash Blaster needed, because using it for myself, I always felt like the Clash Blaster didn't paint too well, and whenever I did try to shoot people with the Clash Blaster, I can never really get my hits on them for some reason, so I feel like this is something I needed. For the Carbon Roller, when running and painting, you reach max speed in 1 second earlier. Its horizontal flick swings much better, and it does 40% more damage against ballers. Nothing too significant there other than it runs faster and paints better. With the Splat Roller, when running and painting, you reach max speed 8% faster, and the horizontal flick for the Splat Roller paints much better, just exactly like the Carbon Roller, and it also does 40% more damage on ballers. With the Dynamo Roller, when you are running and painting, the max speed has been increased by 13%. This is also a buff that I personally am not 100% sure at this point in time, but it seems that when doing a flick with the Dynamo Roller, depending on how high or low the ink is falling down to the floor, the ink spread will be much wider than it was before. Personally, I'm not 100% too sure on this. Like, I've looked at like 3 different sources of translation to try and figure out what this actually means, but this is what I believe it means. The Dynamo Roller also does 60% more damage to ballers. You'll probably notice a pattern that the baller isn't necessarily being nerfed, but weapons are becoming a lot more stronger against it. With the Flingser Roller, while flicking, movement has been increased. With its horizontal flicks, it paints better towards yourself. The maximum horizontal flick distance has also been increased by 17%. The maximum damage of the horizontal flick has also been increased by the 25%, and of course the Flingser Roller does 40% more damage towards ballers. Really interesting things for the Flingser Roller, and it gives you more reason to actually use it compared to the original Splat Roller. The ink brush has also received a small change. If you are suppressed or hit while you are running with the ink brush, you shall not be affected. So basically, if you are running straight ahead towards somebody who is shooting you, you will not receive any knockback or suppression at all. The ink brush can now do 40% more damage towards ballers. The Octobrush, the only thing it received is that now it can do 40% more damage to ballers. For all charger weapons, including the Squiffer, the Splat Charger, the E-Liter, the Bamboozler, and the Goo Tuber, all of these weapons can now do 30% more damage towards ballers. There are also a few individual changes for charges, such as the E-Liter. When firing at a wall, the paint radius has been increased by 33%, meaning that the E-Liter can now paint walls just a little bit better. And while in the middle of a charge using the Bamboozler, the movement speed has been increased by 50%. Which is kind of funny because the Bamboozler is being released tomorrow, and it's being buffed before it even comes out. So, really interesting. The Goo Tuber has a really interesting change as well. First of all, I would like to say that the Goo Tuber charges 5 frames faster, and its damage output from a full charge has been changed from 160 damage to 180 damage. Now, these are some interesting buffs, but another really interesting thing is that the Goo Tuber can now hold a charge when it's not even fully charged. So basically now with the Goo Tuber, you can continuously charge it while you're just moving around the map, which could lead to some really interesting playstyles. The Mini Splatling has also received some really interesting changes as well. The damage output from the Mini Splatling has been changed from 28 damage to 32 damage. The run speed while charging with the Mini Splatling has been increased by 17%, and the run speed while firing with the Mini Splatling has been increased by 14%. Overall, this is something I feel like the Mini Splatling really needed, because I felt like in general it was just much slower than it was compared to Splatoon 1. The Dapple Dualies and the Splat Dualies have also received a buff where there are now 8 frames less end lagged after a dodge roll. I really feel like this is going to be really strong for the Dapple Dualies in general, because you'd already come out of the dodge roll animation so quickly. So overall, that just makes it much quicker and stronger. For the Splat Dualies now, this is something I feel like it really needed, because I felt like when you dodge roll, it'll take too long for you to come out of the dodge roll. So for the Splat Dualies, this is something it really needed. For the Dualie Sculpture now, it also has received the same buff where there are now 8 frames less end lag after dodge rolling. While shooting, the radius of the droplets that fall around you has been increased by 9%. And while you're in turret mode for the Dualie Sculpture, basically when you've rolled into a dodge roll and you're kind of combine the 2 Dualie Sculptures into 1 Dual Sculpture, basically you can now run for a short amount of time while you have the 2 turrets merged together. Really interesting changes for the Dualie Sculpture. I don't think it's going to be too big, but it's really interesting overall. Now for the umbrellas of Splatoon. When using shield mode for the Splatbrella, it is now 8 frames faster. The charge time for the Splatbrella has also been increased by 10 frames. While moving with the open umbrella, you are now 38% faster. The maximum damage per one of the little shot pellets that come out of your umbrella has been increased from 15 damage to 18 damage. Damage that has been inflicted to the umbrella shield that includes shooters, splatlings, and dualies has been reduced by 30%. Bear in mind that this does not include blaster shooters. The umbrella shield will now not break instantly when touched by a baller. And also, of course, I gotta add this on. Damage against ballers is now 30% increased. For the Tentabrella now, there is now 10% less end lag after a shot, which is exactly what I said it needed in my last Tentabrella video. The maximum damage per little shot pellet as well has been increased from 15 damage to 17.5 damage. The maximum damage overall has been changed from 120 damage to 122.5 damage, and the rest of the buffs are the exact same as the Splatbrella, such as the 30% reduced damage with shooters, splatlings, and dualies, the umbrella shield breaking instantly against ballers, and also being able to do 30% more damage against ballers. Now overall for the Splatbrella and the Tentabrella, this is something I definitely feel like it needed. I feel like with the current meta with the Splatbrella, it's not really used because it gets overwhelmed by a lot of things, and hopefully when version 1.4 comes around, weapons like this get more use. Now amazingly, the arrow spray has actually been nerfed. In what world? Where does this make sense? The painting radius after a bullet has directly impacted the ground has been reduced by 10%, the painting radius from droplets falling from bullets have been reduced by 8%, and the frequency of bullets forming from fired bullets has been reduced by 13%. Basically, just to give you an overlook of what all of that means is that the arrow spray isn't going to paint as well as it has been able to. The sloshing machine has also received a nerf. The explosion of a slosh now has a 20% less paint radius. In a dumbed down term, basically the sloshing machine doesn't paint as well. Now the majority of the patch was mainly to do with the main weapons of Splatoon, but there are also some special weapon changes that I'm going to go with you through. Tentamissiles now do 50% more damage against ballers. Stingray now does double the damage against ballers and are able to see opponents behind the walls 23% earlier. Which is really interesting considering Stingray is really strong right now, and now you're able to see people just a little bit earlier. I guess this is something to encourage people not just to hold the Stingray for 8 minutes straight. Inkjets now do double damage against ballers. The Curling Bomb Rush now has 50% more range. Inkstorm now does 150% more damage against ballers. The Bubble Blower now does 20% more damage if an ally hits your bubble. There are 20 frames less end lag after throwing a bubble, meaning that you could probably throw out bubbles much faster than before. And it also does double damage against ballers. Now, what does the Baller get? The Baller now does 150% more damage against other ballers. Ballers are now much louder when running around, so you can hear them better. And the minimum damage radius has been reduced by 14% without special power-up. Which is actually something really interesting, and this also applies for some changes for some gear perks, especially for special power-ups, so we're going to go through those as well. So starting with special power-up, you can increase your aim reticle for Tentamissiles by 67%. When using special power-up for Ink Armor, you'll be able to get your Ink Armor much faster. For the Inkjet, there can be a sacrifice of 50% less duration, but a much larger damage radius instead. The baller's minimum explosion radius can now be expanded by more special power-up, and there are a couple bug fixes for the Inkstorm special. I'm not really too sure what it's talking about. It's kind of mentioning something about bug fixes, so hooray for that. So for the other gear abilities, the Ink Saver level has been changed to low for these weapons such as the Splattershot Pro, the Lunar Blaster, the H3, the Dynamo, the E-Liter, and the Tentabrella. Run speed up is now 20% more effective for Splatling weapons. There's no exact detail for this, but Quick Super Jump is now more effective. Cold-Blooded is now 20% more effective and also protects against Thermal Ink and Stingrays now. Opening Gambit now includes ink resistance up. Blast Stitch Effort has also been improved from 1.8 mains to 2.4 mains of effectiveness. Thermal Ink and Haunt have also been improved, where opponents now don't need to be as close to you for you to actually see them. This has been increased by 23%. For Respawn Punisher, the special loss has been increased when splatting an opponent, and this has been increased from 5% to 15%. Also, the special loss when you are wearing Respawn Punisher has been increased from 7.5% to 22.5%. Really interesting for Respawn Punisher. It becomes more valuable against taking out people's specials, but it also comes at a cost where if you die, you can potentially lose a bunch of your special as well. Drop roll has also received the change where you can now roll in any direction that you choose. Also, the time where you are unable to move just after a drop roll has been removed. And these are pretty much all the buffs and nerfs that have been applied to version 1.4. On my overall look of it, basically the range weapons are being favored a lot. A large majority of the weapons in the game are being stronger against Baller. I personally feel like Baller is also going to still be really strong, but the thing is that it's just a little bit easier now to deal with. The effects of special power-up are also really interesting because the effects are now much different in version 1.4 compared to version 1.3. The only thing I feel like they missed is the Stingray. Personally, I don't feel like the shockwave's radius should be that big, and I also feel like the duration needs to be turned down just a little bit. At this point in time, this is what I think about the patch notes, and I'm actually really happy about it. And personally, I just cannot wait to use the new Splatter Shot Pro and the new 96 Gal, so that's going to be very fun for myself. But anyways, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Please, if you did, please like, favorite, comment, and subscribe to the channel. If you have not already, follow me on Twitter and Twitch, both in the description below. Do it for both if you're feeling generous. And as always, guys, this has been ThatSrb2DUDE, and I shall see you guys in a future video.